provincial China project, and which went on for quite a few years, and writing about Anhui and writing about the relationship between poorer provinces and richer provinces. That led me to do a project on domestic workers in China, and that was summarized, finding summarized. I think I should get on to the next slide. Yeah, so it made in China. I was looking at rural to urban domestic workers who left the village to come to work in homes of middle-class families in Beijing, and then the field work was done in Beijing. And it's really looking at how inequality got played out in the domestic sphere. And so I came up with this term, intimate stranger, in the sense that they're total strangers, but at the same time, they're performing quite intimate tasks on a daily basis. So that kind of, I started to look at how the domestic sphere became a boundary of negotiating sort of rural and urban inequality. And then from domestic workers, I got interested in the idea of the fact that you know, inequality is not just about class differences, but it's probably also about how, you know, people can have different access to cultural productions. So I was looking at how this inequality got played out in the cultural setting. Who has more voice than others? Who has more means of cultural production? Whose voice gets heard? So that took me to my next project, which is to look at the cultural and media practices of domestic workers. And within this context, I look at a group of construction workers, also in Beijing, but on the outskirts of Beijing. So I follow this group of construction workers, mostly predominantly male, a lot of them first generation rural migrants. And that summary, findings kind of pretty much summarized in the second book, Support in China, which is pretty about unequal cultural sort of citizenship. But then I kept asking myself the question as, okay, we talk about the inequality in terms of the economic disparity, income, and consumption power, so on and so forth. And now we can also talk about inequality in terms of cultural sort of resources and access. But just exactly how is inequality sort of impacting on the individuals, and more importantly, on their private lives and intimate lives, particularly for the people who find themselves in the marginalized groups. So that kind of sort of slowly but surely move on to that focus. And so I wanted to ask the question, so what is the intimate consequences of this inequality? So, you know, you know, there are a lot of sociologists who've already done work in this area. You know, I wouldn't want to spend too much time, you know, elaborating on them, but it is in the book if you want to have a look. But very quickly I realized that I came upon a methodological question. That is, if you want to study private life, particularly intimacy, how do you go about doing this? You know, how do you actually find out how people conduct their intimacy? Whereas intimacy, by the nature of things, is meant to be kept away from other people. Right? And so the other thing that interests me is, okay, you can go and talk to people about, are you in love with this person? Or, you know, do you feel romantic about this? But how do I know that the language they use about love and romance is the same way that I understand language, love and romance to be? And also at the same time, I just thought, these are quite subjective, emotional kind of experience, right? It's not something that social scientists can actually capture with hardcore data, statistics. So for instance, I remember when Ponai wrote that well-known book, Made in China, another book called Made in China, she was spending a lot of time considering Then episode where she was sharing the bedroom with some workers, and one of the women, Dagome, let out a big scream in the middle of the night out of anguish and out of pain. And she was at pains to explain, how she could make sense of this scream, right? This scream is not linguistic, it's embodied, it's powerful, but nevertheless, how do you make sense of this? What sort of sociological data is this scream, right? And also, if you fall in love or out of love, you feel, great, you feel sad, you have tears. What kind of methodological data, what sort of data is tears? But nevertheless, it's a quite important part of people's emotional experience. So these are the things that interest me, but at the same time, I find quite challenging. But I think I have found some inspiration by looking at the work of some anthropologists, particularly some anthropologists who have thought a lot about how to do work about intimacy. For instance, Judith Farquhar's work I found quite useful because she was looking at using fictional work, using literature, and using published news and journalism, anything that could actually help her to understand the experience, the emotional experience better. She called novelists anthropologists' best friend. And so she was arguing ethnographers should really form partnerships with writers and artists, rather than treating their work as on par or below sociological rigor. And also found work such as, say, Sherry Opner, anthropologist who was looking at the social formation in the US American society. And she found it useful to actually look at the class experience from the point of view of cultural constructions. In other words, she go to the cultural production, cultural text in order to see how class inequality gets negotiated and gets represented. So I find this kind of methodological musings quite useful. And so with that kind of bit of insight, if you like, I hit the ground running when I started my field work, which was conducted mostly from 2015 to 2017. So these are the 3 years that I went to a district in Shenzhen called Longhua District, Longhua-Chu, in Shenzhen. And I went to this site because that's where Foxconn's plant in Shenzhen is. And that's where the factory is, that's where the workers worked and lived. So I went there because I wanted to be very close to workers and want to spend as much time as possible with them. So every year in each of these 3 years, I would go there for a month or 6 weeks, and I would just spend time with them. Usually, what I do I would do one of the 3 things. One is I will talk to NGO workers whose job it is to advocate on behalf of the workers. And they are very, very helpful and useful because they are very experienced and familiar and knowledgeable about things because they're there on the ground all the time and they're privy to a lot of experience that I was not. Right? So in a way, they are my informers as well as intermediary. And secondly, I spent 3 years talking to a total of 50 individuals. So this is a kind of open-ended, one-to-one, in-depth kind of interviews where usually about lasting an hour and 2 hours, just looking at the whole range of things. I had some questions prepared, but mostly just quite open-ended. And on top of that, I identified 10 people from the beginning of the first year and reached some kind of agreement with them that I'll follow their life as they unfold for the next 3 years. I call them time-lapse or longitudinal research, so I can keep track of what's going on, there's a lot of interest there, and not anymore. There's another one. So, there's all these changes, and I was able to sort of follow. And after 2017, I stay in touch with them, and I hadn't seen them since then, but all of them are on my WeChat contact list, and I'm in regular contact with them, and it's really easy to follow up with that. So that is pretty much the kind of fieldwork site, if you like, where I was doing work. So I think what I want to do now is to spend some time sharing with you the experience or the stories of some of the people that I followed. Out of the 10 people I followed, I tried to talk to some married men and some single men, and some people who are in what I call the 80s cohort, 80后, and some who are in the 90后, 90s cohort. There's people who are born in the 90s. So for the people who are born in the 90s, they're still in their 20s, but the people who are born in the 80s, they're in their late 30s now. So, and also tried both men and women, and also tried to have both the married cohort and an unmarried cohort. So try to get a broad sort of spectrum of the experience there. So I think I'll tell you the stories of two people here. I wouldn't want to show their face here. One of them is an example of a married woman. I'll call her Jay. Right? Jay was born in 1984. She came to Shenzhen to work when she was single. And then she went back to the village because her parents wanted her to go back, and so that the matchmaking, not matchmaking, the xiangqing, the matchmaking was arranged by the parents. Parents have identified a suitable man for her to meet. She met and looked okay. After a couple of days, a marriage date was set. She got married, and so there's hardly any love to her because she really didn't know the man very well. But she said she was very inexperienced. And then after that, they had a child, and then they decided to come out to work in Foxconn. And then they left the daughter to be cared for by his mother. So when I met Jay, that was like the first year. She said she lived in the dormitory, and her husband lived in a rental room by himself. And I thought, oh, they both work in the same factory, and and they're not living together. So, and then I thought it's probably because they want to save money, because dormitory cost was quite minimum, so she's probably trying to save money. But it's only until the next year, the second year, when I caught up with her again, I got to know a little bit more about her. And she opened up a little bit more to me, and she told me that they were living separately because they couldn't get along. All right, so she lived in here, and then he lived in his room, and she would go and visit him over the weekend. She would cook a meal for him and wash all his dirty clothes for him. And but he said, we just fought all the time. We couldn't agree on anything. And he was always complaining about me nagging him. And she said, once and she said, I knew we were told that we need to communicate. I need to talk, because this middle class people know how to work on their relationship. You need to communicate, right? So she's heard about that. So she said, I want to talk. So she kind of said, let's go out for a walk, because the rental property was really kind of like this one, at the right left corner, really small. So they went out for a walk, and she noticed that he was getting a bit more relaxed, and then he opened up a little bit, and even told her about his childhood. And she thought, oh, that's great. Maybe, he opened up when we went out for a walk, and he felt better. So from then on, every time she saw him, and she would say, let's go out for a walk, trying to engineer sort of a walk outside. But very quickly, the man realized that that's just her ploy, the trick to get me out and open up. And he said, I don't want to do that anymore. You just do that because you want to get me to talk. I don't want to talk. What's there to talk? So that avenue of communication sort of was kind of shut down. So she said, it's not that I don't want to talk. I really want to talk, but you can't really communicate if the other person doesn't really want to talk to you. But at the same time, and she didn't really, they were not talking about getting divorced. So they just kept the status quo, if you like. And she talked about divorce, but nothing, they didn't really do anything about this. It's only about 2 years ago when the book just before, got finalized, she told me that finally she got divorced, but it dragged on for a long time. She's still now working in Boston, and the man has gone back home, and the man has got the custody of the daughter, and the daughter is not talking to her anymore because she hadn't seen her for a long time. And every time she wanted to Skype or she wanted to talk to her on QQ, she just didn't want to talk. Which is very, very strange thing, which is really sad. So the last time I talked to her on WeChat audio, she was give me an update on what's going on. And then immediately she said, I've got to go. My shift is going to start. So she was still working the shift. She was working a night shift. She was going to go into the gate in Foxconn to start the evening shift. So I'll tell you a story of Jay because in a way, it's quite common among some of the married women cohort in the sense that from the point of view of the state and the government, they are quite unproblematic. They're married, they're not like leftover men or leftover women, they're married and they're working, but at the same time, if you look at what's really going on, she's the one that's doing what I call the intimacy work. I came up with this concept of intimacy work. That is, she was the one that was doing the heavy lifting in order to try to keep the relationship going, right? And she did a lot of work, but it still really turned out to be not so successful. And as a result of that, the term that's often used to describe the kind of reality between this married cohort is what they call the lembali, right? So it's cold violence. So it's not domestic violence in the physical sense, and there's no physical fight or anything like that. But there's no emotional connection, and then there's very little communication. So the word they use to describe that is cold violence, and that describes it's fairly common. It's not for everyone, but it's fairly common. And then the other story I want to share with you is the story of H. He belonged to the unmarried man cohort. He was born in the 80s, so he's one of the 80后. And compared with 90后, that's compared with the younger generation, people who were born in the 90s, people in the 80s who were born in the 80s find it particularly difficult to strike a conversation or to find a marriage partner, to sustain a relationship with a woman, a girlfriend. And H also came from quite a poor mountainous village area in Jiangxi province. And he worked in Foxconn as well when I first met him. So when I actually held my iPad and he said, I'll have some questions for you, he looked at my iPad and said, I might have assembled that iPad. He was joking with me. And I thought that was pretty poignant, actually. And he was working very hard, and he wanted to get a girlfriend. His parents desperately to see him come home with a girl because there's a lot of pressure back in home in the village. The neighbors were asking all the time, when's your son getting married? Is he got a girlfriend? So the parents under a lot of pressure as well. So, and then the pressure on him as well. And the next year I saw him, he said, I'm not in Foxconn anymore, I'm not in Shenzhen anymore, I'm in Foshan, which is a city an hour's drive out of, and now I'm working in a factory producing furniture. And I said, oh, I'll come and I'll catch up with you. So I went to Foshan to meet him up and catch up with him. Same old story, no girlfriend, wanting to, but no. And I said, why did you change job? He said, oh, the factory pays better because it's better than Foxconn. Foxconn is pays just not enough money. And, so he's trying to save up some money and he's trying to move on to a slightly better paying job. And so the third year I caught up with him. He was still in Foshan and I caught up with him. We met in a cheap restaurant outside a 4-star hotel. And then we had lunch and he told me he chose that place to eat because he now worked as a security guard in a 4-star hotel. And I thought, oh, so you changed from Foxconn and factory making furniture, and now you're working in a security guard. Why? He said, oh, it pays slightly better, but not much. So at the end of the day, H's story is that of what I call horizontal mobility. He moved from job to job for slightly better pay, but he has not accumulated anything in terms of social capital, economic capital, or professional skill sets, right? In fact, the further he goes along horizontally, the more there is, more attrition there is in terms of his value. In the meantime, and I said, there's no girlfriends on the horizon, there's even more pressure, to the point that he didn't really want to go home anymore because he just too much to deal with. He just preferred to stay in where he was during the Chinese New Year. And so he's actually, compared with a lot of other people, men I've met, he was quite good looking. And it wasn't just my sort of view. Quite a few co-workers said he's really quite good looking, but he's extremely, extremely shy. He didn't know how to talk to people. And also his biggest problem is that he's actually quite traditional. So H actually kept telling me, 我们80后, people in our cohort, we're very proper. If we go out with a girl, we want to treat her seriously, we want to treat her well. Unless I have serious intentions, I don't want to take advantage of her. Unlike, he said, unlike these people in the 90s cohort, we just go out with a girl and sweet talk her into anything and then just, walk away. He said, I will never do that. So that is the kind of, I talked to quite a few people in the 80s unmarried cohort, and they have similar kind of view. They kind of differentiate themselves from the 90s cohort as a way of marking themselves as being different, but at the same time is in the sense of, I have my moral standards to, I have my ethical conduct to maintain, which I thought is quite interesting. Okay, now moving on, I want to just, how am I doing this time? How much time do I have?
Another 10.
Okay, good. I'm doing well. What do I do to get to the next one? Okay, now, I told you before that I not only want to talk to workers, and I also want to look at how workers are represented, how workers are imagined, how media and popular culture and the government talk about workers and their intimate experience. Because I think inequality for me is not just about how inequality impact on their intimate experience. It's also about how their intimate experience is judged, is talked about by people in their own group as well as people outside the groups. Right? So that is I'm interested in the cultural politics of this as well as the economics of it. So I drew inspirations, if you like, from a number of textual sources. For my analysis, I look at CCTV, and if I have time, I play 2 minutes of footage from CCTV, and I'll look at photography, and I look at story, I look at novels, and I look at poetry, and I look at state media like 中国妇女报 media, Women's Daily, and I look at Foxconn management union's statement, their newsletters, and what they say, and I look at the commercial media, commercial sort of media whose main profit the sort of agenda is to make profit. So I look at the whole range of textual sources, and what do I do with them? I do not take any single one of the sources as being more valid than others. I do not say this one is more authoritative and accurate, and the others are less so. What I do is I put them next to each other, and I try to find out the connections between them. Sometimes I find there is connection, there's complicity between various sources. Right? Sometimes I find there is some kind of collision, but some kind of compromise. Sometimes I find contrast and opposition, right? So I'll spend a lot of time analyzing the connection and relationship between the various sources. There's what I call the various discursive side, if you like, because that's where we can get at the core of how inequality gets played out in the cultural domain. Now, if I let me just would like to give you a case study on how this is the case. Okay. Melanie, can I get you to play a video? The first one. I only want to play a couple of minutes because I don't have too much time. But this is a Chinese Central Television's story about how they tell stories about rural migrant workers and how they pursue intimacy and love with a very positive, very uplifting sort of agenda to and just give you a taste of what that is. Yes.
对于很多农村的年轻人来说，春节前后往往是他们喜结良缘、拜堂成亲的好日子。安徽的小伙子韩廷才在上海打工多年，今年春节，他和女朋友张小琴打算在老家完婚。小韩和小琴是在上海打工的时候相识相恋的，经历了一系列的曲折之后，今年终成眷属。本台新春走基层的记者到上海和安徽跟踪记录了小韩回家办婚礼的全过程。
那这个的话就是带出来就比较豪华时尚的。你想买什么价位的预算吗？
预算都没有，看着他喜欢呗。
韩廷才24岁，在上海打工已经5年了。2009年，他在上海一家冰箱厂打工时，认识了来自陕西汉中的女孩张小琴。相恋4年，这个春节他们终于迎来了婚期。
感觉有点不切合实际了。
由于工厂年底订单忙，小韩让小琴先回安徽老家筹备婚礼。 自己加了几天班，今天抽空和哥哥一起来买婚戒和西装。
不是，这叫我穿的跟啥东西一样，能老不自在了，你。还行，花掉了，花掉了，不好意思。
第一次穿西装，小韩怎么看自己都别扭，最终哥俩还是商量去买件休闲服。
我穿大红的好看吗，哥？
小韩的哥哥告诉我们，小韩这媳妇儿讨得辛苦，从一开始女方的父母就不赞成，2个年轻人还差点因此分手。
泰山收回去了吗？今天
买完东西，小韩又回到单位加班。小韩所在的车间生产的是工业用的母线，在熟悉的流水线旁，小韩打开了话匣子。他说，当年他和小琴就是在同一条流水线上工作时认识的。当时他是操作工，小琴是质检员。喜欢他什么？
脾气啊，脾气好直的，跟他一样。有一次有。
I don't have time to show you the whole thing, but you'll be very pleased to know that this story has a happy ending, and they got married. We don't know whether it's ever happily after. We don't know, but well, this story they got married. So there's a whole series of this. This is only one of them. Okay, and this is called 流水线上的爱情 Love on the Assembly Line. Right. Basically, the main message is that as long as you work hard, as long as you've got a goal, you will get there. Right. It's quite a lot of optimism there.
And you've obviously got a long enough lunch hour that you can pop out and do some shopping.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And so the 流水线上的爱情 CCTV chose this title because it was inspired by a set of photographs. That was the artwork of Shanghai, well-known Shanghai photographer. His name was Jia Dai, and he produced a set of a whole group of photographs, and it's called 流水线上的爱情 Love on Assembly Line. And when CCTV got hold of this his work, they thought, oh, that's really a good title for our new series. So that they use his work. The story of Jia is that he's a middle-class professional photographer working for a newspaper in Shanghai. Came the Chinese New Year, there's always seasonal, let's do a coverage of rural migrant workers. And he said, oh, this year, and he heard that rural migrant workers, a lot of them could not afford a proper wedding with white gowns and photography shooting. And then he said, wouldn't it be nice if we actually offer a photo shoot so that they can wear the gown and give them a really nice photograph and get them to give them an opportunity to experience romance and live out this sort of romantic experience, even though some of them is retrospective. And the newspaper's editor said, "Great, go ahead and do it." So he got the camera. He bought a lot of hot water bottles and took them to the workshop in the factory. Hot water bottles because it's very cold, and you need to wear a lot of, you need to keep warm. And the worker said, "Oh, that's great. Is this for free?" "Yes, it is for free. You will get the photograph after the photo shoot." And he said, and the worker said, "So where should we go to have the photo taken?" He said, "Here, just here in the workshop." And the worker said, "Oh, here?" And he said, "This is really more meaningful because this is where you work. It forms a contrast between the hardness of the surface of the industrial sort of a thing and your soft emotional stuff." And from his point of view as an artist, that's perfect. So he did that. You can see the photo, the couples were kind of in the factories, against the background of places they work. And the photos just became very popular, and Western photographic exhibitions, show some of the work, and he won international prizes for his work. And I saw those photos, and I just thought, oh, but I wonder how the workers themselves make sense of this. So I took these photos and I incorporated it as part of my interviews, and I said, look at these photos. Tell me what's coming to your mind when you first see them. And they thought, some just looked at it for a long time, and they said, cold. And I said, is this romantic? No. And I said, why? They said, well, if you really want romance, why don't you take them to a beach or to somewhere in a really nice park? And I said, but isn't that a cliche? And they said, oh, well, it may be cliche for you, but it'd be nice. And then I thought that really, really was interesting to me, because it made me realize that how that photographer's understanding of representation of romance and appropriate representation of love is not that kind of visual lingo that the workers resonated with. But nevertheless, in order to go along with that photo shooting process, the workers had no choice. They were just put there and take a picture. So which I think there's not much negotiation in terms of power dynamics there. And it's how the middle class wish to represent a particular group of people that is socially speaking beneath them. So, but the intention was good. There's a lot of compassion there. But this is how complex these become, and this is how inequality gets played out as well. So, but finally, I want to just finish with a worker's own. Oh, sorry, what did I do? Oh, a worker's own statement. You don't have to read it because it's too much, and I'll read it out for you. And this is the statement from a worker. He's the only 80s cohort worker who managed to get married during the 3 years when I was there. And I asked him, why is it so difficult to find a wife? And this is what he said. He said, people like us come from the countryside. We don't own a house and a car, and many of us can't afford the cost of getting married, including caili. Caili is the money you pay to the bride before you get married. That can be quite hefty in some places. So if you're poor but good looking, you may have a chance, right? But then again, if you're that good looking, you wouldn't be working at Foxconn, would you? He said that. And also, girls like boys who have glib tongues and pay them a lot of attention and shower them with gifts, even though these boys may not have serious intentions. See, he echoes H. He said, young people, those who were born in the 1990s, they tend to have a more casual approach to when it comes to girls. Older ones like me, who were born in the 80s, are more serious. And he said, I have seen too many boys who are honest and who want to do the honorable thing by girls, but they're shy and they don't know how to talk to them. And that may not be a problem if you're loaded with money, because the money can talk for you, and he said. But what chance do you have if you have no money and if you look ordinary and you don't know how to talk to girls? Right. So he said, most of the men you see here fit that description, especially those who are born in the 1980s. And then he said, let's face it, girls like men who are confident and who can talk them, even though they may not be as dependable as the honest white ones. That's why you see so many lonely people here, starving for love, sexually frustrated, and feeling lost. Right? And then he said, in terms of girls, and I said, also, you seem to be quite judgy of girls. And he said, oh, look, don't get me wrong. They are also under a lot of pressure, he said. You know, if they agree to go out with someone whose family couldn't afford a new home or a wedding gift, then they will be looked upon by others in the village. So they compete with one another. Girls don't want to look like losers. So that's his honest account from his point of view of what's going on. It's miles away from what CCTV was telling you what's going on. And it's not necessarily something that's represented in artistic photography as well. So that's kind of a story I thought was quite interesting to consider. Finally, in 1 minute, I know I'm probably running out of time, is why I call this book Love Troubles. I think you deserve explanation. I think I have what I call dual intentions. I have sort of want to play with this, a bit of play with words here, because I want to show how political, socio-economic, and cultural and moral forces work together in order to cause troubles in rural migrant men and women's pursuit of love and intimacy. So it's a way of saying inequality has a lot of serious consequences, and it also impacts on their love life. So it's kind of love troubles in a sociological empirical sense. The other meaning of the trouble is that I want to trouble. I want to use the word trouble as a verb. I want to trouble the dominant paradigm of love and romance. I want to actually problematize the notion, the middle class notion of what is love and romance, or what the state tells you, discourse from their discourse of governing and governmentality, what you should understand love to be. And I want to trouble this notion of this dominant understanding of what love is, but actually and say that we should actually approach this maybe from another angle. I think probably personal dignity and just emotional justice is probably more important than the question of who has got more love or who has got more intimacy. I think I'll stop there then.
Okay, great.
Happy to take questions.
Wonderful.